Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of Tech Bites Takeover, or as I love to call it, Between Two Geese. We've got a great episode for you today. We've got a special guest star. We're going to be talking about some cool new things, and we've got a special link that Matt here is going to drop into chat. So if this is your first time joining, please drop a hi into chat, and let's get this going. So Matt, why don't you bring us into what are we talking about today?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction there, Tyler. Got a lot on the plate today. We're going to be talking about three things that should be on your radar for 2026. We're going to highlight two community posts that we saw in the past couple of weeks that kind of stood out to us. It's something we want to dive a little bit deeper on. We've got a special guest star who we'll introduce in a moment here, who will walk us through one demo. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what's in the news right now. Lots of stuff going on. And at the end of the day, we want to leave you with 0 reasons to regret tuning in. So with that being said, before we introduce our special co-host today, you may note that I've got a couple of special geese over my shoulder here. And you might be saying, well, what's the deal with those? Well, it's that time of year. It's, we thought, let's have some fun. We're going to be talking automation today. We're going to be talking about what it means. And we thought, let's talk a little bit about, automation at home. So if you're so inclined, feel free to join us as we've got this handy dandy URL, festive.2geese.com, where you can actually log in with some credentials I just dropped into the chat here, where you can actually go and you can control those geese live on there. So we want to make it interactive. Now, that being said, I've been talking a lot. Got a special co-host with us today, Emilee Tellez, joining us live from on location in Vegas. Emilee, why don't you give us a quick introduction, hello, and how are things going?
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm a little sad that, it took this long to get me on the Two Geese what podcast, LinkedIn Live, webinar. I mean, streaming everywhere near you. But I am the field CTO for Veeam. Excited to be here. Excited to talk about automation. Not too excited that you just shared a single credential, username, and password with everybody on LinkedIn. But, we'll just ignore that for now.
Oh, it's all sandboxed and took all the proper security measures that we could, absolutely. But, we're talking about home automation here. And, why is it relevant right now? Tyler and I were talking about, let's talk something that maybe a lot of the broader audience can appreciate. A lot of us are technical in nature, and a lot of us do some form of home automation. I personally use Home Assistant for a lot of stuff, especially this time of year. I have lots of different lights, whether it's on a Christmas tree, festive lights outside, or some festive geese, over my shoulder here. I like to time them to things like, hey, come on at sunset, stay on till 11 p.m., all that sort of stuff. I would love to just kind of toss it out there as a bit more of a broader question to the two of you. Do you do any sort of home automation at home right now? What's that look like? And if so, what do you do? If not, why not? Tyler, why don't you go first?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So I do a bit of home automation. I haven't gone crazy into the Home Assistant yet, but like seeing these geese light up and turn off has kind of encouraged me a little bit. And with a lot of our discussions, I really want to get into a little bit more of that Home Assistant because I use, some of the other big name players out there, and it gets a little frustrating sometimes timing everything and working its way through. But I've seen what you can do with Home Assistant. I can see how you can get those geese really lit up. And that's encouraged me a bit to say, maybe I need to dive in and get some more of the home automation side going. But I know Emilee loves her own home automation. She says it works great for her. Emilee, why don't you share what you do?
No bugs. Yeah, it's seamless every single time. No, the home automation, it's come a very long way. I think even just going back to, your example of just the lights, right? Something as simple as being able to have things trigger for when you are coming home, your nightly routine as far as, when you actually start getting ready for bed, or for leaving the house. So, I mean, I have those traditional automation tools set up, but sometimes things fail. Sometimes it doesn't respond to your asks and to your commands. Sometimes one random light will be blue when the rest of them are white, and you just gotta roll with it. Eventually, it's gonna get better. So that's pretty much the most that I dabble in right now at home.
Yeah. Now, one of the
Absolutely.
neat things about the automations is, I think what draws a lot of us close to it, is that consistency that we hope to achieve. And you kind of touched on it there, Emily, a little bit. It's not always perfect at home, but it's nice when things just do kind of work. When Tyler and I were talking about this idea, we found this article here that he's just pulled up. And one of the things that really stood out to us is how active the Home Assistant community actually is on GitHub. So a little further down this article, there's a great graphic that kind of shows that it was what, number 10, I think, Tyler, as far as active projects on GitHub, which kind of says something. I mean, automation's obviously important. So it's kind of neat to see that this open source project is so lively and has so much interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. It was incredible to me when, we started talking a little bit about home automation and what you do and how you really just drive towards turning those geese on and off. But how much that home automation GitHub project, this open source project is so big, right? I think it's just drives more to the sense of where people want to go with their automation story. They want to automate a little more of their lives, and I think people want to get, away from those, mundane tasks, right? Like I think home automation, I kind of think back to, home um the old movie, Home Alone, where Macaulay Culkin is sitting there automating his life to try to keep the bad guys out of his house. And that's what I always kind of think of when I do the home automation is, hey, can I turn my lights on and off? Can I, lock my door or unlock my door and stuff like that, right? So I like that kind of story. And when I look more into what you can do with the home automation with that home assistant, it's like my mind was blown. I never really dived into it that much, but Matt, you've encouraged me. I'm going to get more into it.
I hope one
Yeah.
of our viewers decides to take Tyler and put him into Nano Banana and have him do the whole Macaulay Culkin puppet strings of pulling the different ones from Home Alone. Like that would be awesome. I hope one of our viewers does do that for us.
Hint, hint. Yeah, I do want to give a quick shout out to a lot of the folks joining in. I've seen Hungary so far, Costa Rica, I see Dubai. So, of course, got some folks from the US and Canada. So thank you everyone for joining in. This is great. And, while I'm talking to the audience, do you use any sort of, home automation? If so, what's that look like? Has there anything that you found that's been, super useful for you? Or do you just find that quite often enough it's just not worth the effort? Because there is a lot of dabbling that kind of needs to go into this. And, as part of it, one of the things that we were doing to just start tinkering around with this, I mentioned we use Cloudflare tunnels and all sorts of stuff, is we also leaned into some of the AI tools available out there. Emily just mentioned that she's assigning to the audience out here. We'll have to see what comes from that. I'm looking forward to that. But AI is definitely becoming more and more intertwined with all this. For those of you who follow Veeam, we announced today that we've closed on the security AI deal. So we've fully acquired them. They're being rolled in. So expect to see a lot of news coming from that direction. And of course, we've got the Veeam intelligence components that exist today. But where I'm going with all this is there's a real, opportunity here to take a lot of that AI story and weave it into what we're doing from the automations. And I mentioned earlier, automations, a lot of the time we do it, at least in the professional capacity, to have that consistent approach. You want to make sure that things are running the way that they should be, when you need them, which is why we have Emilee here. Emilee, you're all things when it comes to disaster recovery, orchestration, security, consistency. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, let's talk about, Veeam Recovery Orchestrator. I mean, that's kind of the workhorse of the Veeam Data Platform here. Where does automation fit in when it comes to, what organizations should be looking at?
So automation for a lot of the customers and the organizations that I work with, it really just comes down to helping them from a time perspective, right? How do we get down to not having to consistently, time and time over again, go through an entire process of testing or validating these items and making it, full of manual work. But so when I think about it from like an automation or an orchestration perspective, right, there's really these three main things. And I actually talked about this yesterday at the session that I had here, right? Is that we have to go back to the very basics of, you have your people, you have your process, you have your tech. The tech is always going to be the easiest part to find, is what I've always seen and what I've always understood, right? If you have a problem for something, there is a number amount of technology leaders that are all out there that can actually help you to actually solve the solution or solve the problem that you're looking for. But you get into this world where maybe the tech, now you have multiple point products, right? And now they're not talking to each other. And now you need to orchestrate and communicate between each one of these. And that becomes a little bit more harder to do. And then that's what kind of drives this down to these processes. So thank you, Ted. You could see here, right? What do we do around our overall process? How do we go and how do we validate that? How do we know what's next inside of our workflows that we should be going through and actually following up with? When's the last time we updated our processes? So many organizations, when we talk about what does disaster recovery or even cyber recovery look like? They're stuck in still some of these age-old types of processes where, they thought that disaster recovery was going to fit the bill for every type of data loss event, including a ransomware incident or a cyber attack. And it's becoming harder and harder for them to understand that you can't just respond the same way to these different types of events. And then it kind of rolls us back to, the people. Do we have the right people that are here that can actually execute? Do we have the right people that have been here long enough that understand, what goes into these processes, knows how to utilize the technology? I think in our business, right, from a technology standpoint, we're seeing, there's a big gap in terms of those that are available inside of the workforce from an IT perspective as well as a security perspective. So it's kind of trying to get the right people, build and develop the right culture in order to ensure that the processes that we have put in place for a data loss event are going to meet the needs of the business and provide the right outcome that we would like to achieve, and that we have the technology that's going to be able to identify and fit the SLAs that we've determined from the business. So all these items kind of work together. And as you see, right, it could just be a mixture of what's going to be the largest gap for a customer or for an organization to really try to grab hold of. But in all honesty, you need all three of these things in order to actually come out with the best data resilient strategy. And when we go into automation is only going to help you to kind of close these gaps. It's never going to just take over, and that there's no longer going to be a need for any one of these, right? We still are going to have that man in the box or the human in the middle to help to orchestrate some of these commands. You're still going to have somebody who needs to validate those processes, and you're still going to have the right technology that's going to meet the needs of the business.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
there's a lot there that you kind of touched on. And one thing that sticks out to me thinking back to, my days being an IT manager, being an systems administrator, is just really all that pain that goes around ensuring this stuff stays up to date. And there's so much to that. It's not just a matter of ensuring the documents are up to date. It's a matter of ensuring that they've been tested, that the readiness is there. So lots of challenges for sure. Tyler, I know that you had some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, and I think Emily really kind of hit the key points there where it really is almost like a dance between the three, right? You got to get the right people and the right processes and the right tech together to achieve that data resilience goal that you have, right? So if you're working with, outdated tech or tech that really just doesn't automate the way you need it to automate, you're going to be struggling. Or as we know, IT is very static and never changes, and everything just always stays the same constantly through 20 years of business. And I say that very sarcastically because it doesn't, right? Things change all the time. And so you need to make sure that your tech stays up to date with what you're doing, and your people keep getting, new information as things change. So we got to make sure that we have the right people, processes, and tech together as your business evolves, as your needs change, to make sure that we're consistently orchestrating and automating towards the right end goal. So this isn't something you do once and you set it and forget it, right? This is something you continuously improve upon, and it just gets better with age.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, data resilience isn't a checkbox, and then it's quite funny because I would hear a lot of those questions that would actually come up from just different users saying, well, how do we make sure our organization is going to be resilient, right? How do we achieve or how do we unlock this data resilience? And it's really there's so many things that go into it outside of, well, do you have data? Is it protected? Can you recover it? Do you know how to recover it, right? Those are some of the very basic questions, but we have to start at the top level. What is the most important things that are going to matter to your business during a cyber event, during a disaster recovery event, during a data loss event? Do you have those applications? Do you have those workloads fully documented? Do you understand the business impact that that's going to possibly have if you didn't have access to them, if your customers or if your services that you're offering were no longer existent? I mean, Matt, how terrible would it have been if you just shared out that login to everybody and then all of a sudden it went down, right? So nobody was going to be able to light up
Exactly.
any of the geese behind you. So it would have put a hamper on this actual event today. But so there's so many things that go into, talking about what makes an organization truly resilient, and then how can automation actually help you to close the gap when it comes to time and readiness. But we have to have all these things identified beforehand.
Absolutely. And you did touch on something there. We are actually doing this live. Want to say hi to our friends from Ethiopia who joined. And I bring that up again because, hey, I dropped the credentials in. If you do want to play with the geese above my shoulder, feel free to toggle the lights remotely. But also, we are monitoring the chat. So if you have some questions that come up before we hop into the demo, which we've got queued up next year, feel free to drop those in, and we'll do our best to try and answer what we can live here.
Mhm.
So Emilee, are you ready to kind of walk us through a demo just
Yeah,
showing us how we could solve some of these problems, some of these
absolutely.
challenges that we've addressed?
So I think one of the biggest challenges that I always find with organizations is the documentation standpoint. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation with a customer or with a prospect, and they say, "Yep, we test our disaster recovery, or we test for data loss events, once a year, and the majority of the time we are actually spending the first week or the first couple of days during that test to update documentation." Right? Because we've made changes inside of the organization. We've discontinued applications. We've moved servers from that were once protected on-prem into the cloud, or we've completely decommissioned them so they're no longer active. And now here we are having to go through and review this documentation that we've done by hand and figure out, okay, actually, it turns out some of these workloads don't even exist anymore. So the majority of the time they're spent doing just that up-to-date documentation. And so what we're seeing here is it's a way for us to actually get some additional dynamic reporting through Veeam. So with Veeam, right, we're getting some of these different types of reports that are pre-built, they're out of box, you get access to this, right? And that goes through, there's multiple different types of reports you get here. You could get something from that we call as readiness check. So essentially make sure that the underlying infrastructure that you're going to be recovering to is actually ready. It's available. We know where we're going to be storing our data to. We know what types of resources are going to be necessary for those. We have things like the audit plan. So if we see changes that have happened throughout the entire lifespan of that specific disaster recovery or recovery plan, we can make sure that that's fully audited, and we can go back and we can do our checks to see what's changed, who did what with them. So we have all this different types of documentation that you could see here. So right now I'm just kind of quickly showing you, you're seeing this this plan where we're going to get a quick high-level summary of these are the workloads that are associated to it. This is the licensing that we have. If we have any pre-planned steps that we want to have executed before we actually kick off the recovery, and then getting into a lot more of the nuanced information in here, right? When we went and we did a scan of this information, did we identify anything that could have been seen as malicious or suspicious within the backup itself? So that way we can make sure that we're recovering data, clean data into a pristine environment. So some of the reports that you're going to see in here, again, very rich in documentation. And the nice thing is it's generated for you. So every click that you're doing inside of the Veeam platform, when you're creating your backup jobs, when you are building out your recovery plans and selecting the backups that you want to have be recovered, the order that you want them to be recovered in, all of these items are going to be pushed into this specific documentation plan. So we can kind of see how this information is going to be flowing throughout the actual restore portion of the business. So it's a great opportunity for you to be able to leverage this and to actually have conversations with the business if you are missing SLAs. Right. So if you identify an SLA of 24 hours or 7 days or whatever it may be, and now all of a sudden we're telling you that we don't have or we don't see that the data has a restore plan or has a backup from XYZ amount of days, and so now we're missing an RPO or missing an RTO. Orchestrator really kind of shines a light on any of those SLAs for customers to see.
Yeah, I love it. And one of the things I like about seeing this demo in actual video form is it's hard to make documentation look exciting and good. But the takeaway from this is how easy it is to create that complete documentation that you could have and that you should have. Being able to go in there and perform things like actually checking, do you have the right licensing and all that sort of stuff? Understanding how long these things will actually take to recover is, extremely critical. Especially going into a DR event. I'm sure the three of us have been in situations where it's a matter of, hey, you know what, we're going to execute this plan because the system is down. How long should it take to come up? What is normal? And if you don't have that baseline, it's really, really hard to understand, are things working the way they should be? What does normal look like? So once again, I love these reports. I feel like it's hard to do them justice, but they solve so many problems. And nobody loves doing documentation except for Tyler. I know he loves doing documentation. It's his jam. But nobody wants to spend their Friday evenings going there, going through documentation, seeing if it's still updated. So just taking the hassle out of that is just so good.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
I like it because it really helps uncover those gaps that you might have. Like somebody comes along, deploys some new servers, and maybe they weren't properly captured in your DR plan, but now your app stack doesn't recover properly. You can see why when you get to this documentation step. So I really like some of these tools and not just ensuring that you've got a good recovery plan, but outlining where the gaps might be before a disaster ever happens. So when you get to that case where you have a problem and you need to recover, you have that confidence that you can recover and make sure your business stays up and running. Like it's a great system.
Absolutely. And I know we talked just a little bit about, obviously we were discussing a lot of what Orchestrator brings from you from a documentation and workflow, but even when we start thinking about like ITSM and what we're doing there around that space, and if you already have workflows that have already been created, right? Veeam in such great news this entire week, but we also did just launch another app that's available inside the ServiceNow marketplace. So there's some bi-directional communication that's happening there where customers that already have their embedded workflows, you have how you want to be able to create your backup policies and you have these workflows for it, know that there is a new way that you can integrate your ServiceNow application directly with the Veeam application as well. So a lot of automation and efforts there going into how can we help to solve some of the operational challenges that IT teams might be dealing with.
Now, one of the things that we really kind of pride ourselves on here at Veeam is the community that we build around a lot of the products. A lot of users helping users, a lot of way for folks like the three of us to interact with the community, to share knowledge. Um, just before we shift to the next segment here, where we got a couple of questions that we want to go through, Emilee, where can folks learn more about Veeam Recovery Orchestrator?
So definitely go to the community page. There's a Vero Heroes group that we have, Veeam Recovery Orchestrator champions that are posting pretty much every other day, and they're sharing, their processes, their best practices for how they go about orchestrating and creating the documentation for their recovery plans, for their cyber recovery plans, for their testing. So definitely go there, check it out. And then, of course, if you don't have Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, you could always download a trial to go ahead and get started.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks for that, Emilee. So, I wanted to bring it back to the community. And we've got, a really great, very vibrant community on both the community sites here on Veeam, on the R&D forums, and then on Reddit itself. And I like to go to Reddit because you get that unbiased view of Veeam itself, and you get some really great questions on here. Like this one here, where, what kind of file system would be best in our scenario? And they're seeing a lot of conflicting information between NTFS versus REFS and what really they should use. And I found this conversation fascinating. There was a ton of different comments. Matt, what do you think people should be using for their file systems, for their repositories?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it comes down to what works best. Like there's not going to be a one size fits all for any of this. And what I love about this question, specifically why you chose it, Tyler, is because it kind of highlights some of that, right? So we've got REFS, there's obviously XFS, then you've got proprietary systems, maybe you've got dedupe appliances, maybe you're old school, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got really great. We've got really great interaction here with, the REFS versus XFS. And I've been always a big fan of going to that XFS style repository there for those, for your repositories, for your normal backups there. And that kind of, really gives you that extra immutability for, or gives you that possibility of enabling immutability at home, which kind of leaves you to that second question, right? Like Veeam immutability, and they're struggling with their Windows repository and going through to, what kind of repository should they be using to gain that immutability. And so I like, offering that Veeam hardened repository because you get that immutability out of that box, right? Using that Veeam software appliance because you get that built-in immutability. And then tying it off with that 3-2-1 rule, getting those offsite backups with Veeam Vault. So you got immutability in every step of the way, along with your data resilience strategy. Emilee, I know you like talking about all this stuff. You got any comments here?
Yeah, the biggest piece, right, is we saw REFS as being a very large, I would say, implementation from a repository perspective back in 2016, and there was so much that you could do around having some of those capabilities of being able to recover items quickly, store data more efficiently. But, you kind of lacked a little bit with that immutability. So I think going back to your point of having that Veeam hardened repository, not only are you getting all those benefits of REFS, but you're also getting the immutability factors, the automatic hardening factors. So there's some really great advantages for you to leverage the Veeam hardened repository. So I don't feel like it's a matter of which one over which. I think it's a matter of, how can we make sure that from a data perspective that we're going to be more secure and that we can have immutability out of box. And this is one way that you can do it automatically without much tinkering or having to manage that yourself.
Absolutely. And I like that because, it gives us a good sense of getting that immutability, right? So that brings me to my other question for you, the audience. Are you using immutability today? Maybe you have a great use case for why you're using it or why you're not using it. Drop those comments into chat. Again, we're here for you. We want to engage with you. So please talk to us. Tell us, what you're doing at your office, at your work, and are you using different file systems? What's your preferred way of deploying your repositories today? So leave those comments in chats and we will get, we'll address them as we go. And I think that kind of leaves us with, our next segment, what are three things that you should be on your radar for 2026? I think we had that big announcement today with security.ai closing. And I think, one of those big things to be on your radar is that AI is here to stay. That's my thought to you. Keep in mind that AI is here to stay, and how you use it is really going to enable you to be more productive. And it's not, a catch-all for everything. You're not going to necessarily want to be using AI for every different aspect of your job, but where I found AI is really helpful when I'm looking at my Veeam jobs is just, even asking Veeam Intelligence, what can I do with this error? What does this error mean? What is the next steps that I should be looking at? Matt, I'll toss it over to you. What's one thing that you think people should be thinking of in 2026?
I think not necessarily AI, but just in general, broadening the skills gap. We've been seeing it more and more over the last 3 years, whether folks are looking at shifting hypervisors, needing to learn a new platform, shifting to cloud, needing to learn a new technology. It might sound a little cliche, but I think this is going to be another year where you need to kind of sit down and figure out, where should I be looking at, whether it's up leveling my skills, retraining my skills, going deeper on existing skills. At the hypervisor level, there's a lot of things that are kind of, it's the same across the board. But on the flip side, there's also a lot of situations where you need to know those nuances, whether it's for personal use, in a home lab, or maybe it's possibly, what does your organization, what does your enterprise, what does your business need to do in 2026 in order to, whether it's reduce costs, whether it's better support, ultimately, what do you need to do in order to make sure that you are able to fix the problems that you need to fix? So a little bit of a long-winded answer there. You know what, Emilee, what's on the radar for you in 2026?
So I'll do a combination between the both of you, and I think data is never going to be more important as we enter into 2026. So if we even look at from in terms of AI, right? Before we get started with it, we have this conversation about how we want to design our infrastructure, our architecture to be resilient. We want to have it secure by default. I think going into next year, a lot of organizations are going to think about, AI needs to be compliant, right? So where do we start with our AI projects that we're going to need to make sure that we have some governance around those, that we're understanding the state laws that come down to, what AI practice might look like and what are going to be those best practices when we are an organization that's operating in multiple different countries as well, and making sure that we understand those new rules and regulations. So we're in this very pivotal transitional period here right now where we're seeing organizations that are very excited to start leveraging AI and being able to close some competitive gaps that they might have. But also, it's this pivotal point where we need to take a step back and really look at what are going to be some of the things that we want to make sure we're reducing risk on, right? Because there's a new operational landscape out there when it comes to risk for these AI agents and the APIs that they get access to and what they can expose and who might be able to expose those for bad or for good. And you don't want to have a data privacy storm on your hands and end up in the news. So there's going to be a lot around data and data governance, data privacy, compliance, before we actually get into all the wonderful things that we can automate and orchestrate when it comes to our overall business goals. So data is going to be a pretty big impact, and that's understanding where we can go next in 2026.
Absolutely. Great insights there, Emilee. So I want to, thank everybody for joining us here today. I really want to give a shout out to everybody who has turned on and off the geese as we've gone through the air. I enjoy just watching Matt's stream so I can see the geese light up and turn off. It's actually been a pretty big highlight of today's episode with you. And one thing I want to leave you all with here is we're going to be bringing out a few, what we're calling Goose Bites. And these are going to be, 5 or 10 minute videos where we dive a little more into a single topic, a single feature that we want to showcase for you out there. So if there is some feature in Veeam that you're like, hey, Tyler or Matt, can you dive a little more deep into this? Can you give me a video? Why should I use this? How can it help me? Let us know, drop some comments into chat, and we'll get them out on our next Goose Bites episode. And a big, huge thank you today to Emilee Tellez. Emilee, thank you so much for joining us. I've enjoyed every moment of today, and I'm super glad we were able to get you here, squeezed between the two geese.
Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Thanks all. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next year.